This is a production of Cornell University.
Right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hemp 411. We are so thrilled that y'all have joined us today. So my name is Zach Stansel. I am the USDA Hemp Germplasm Curator. So we're based in Geneva, New York. There's a little bit of sunlight and a little bit of warmth here, so spring is coming in Geneva. And what we do here is we run a seed library for hemp. So we collect hemp from all over the world, store it, grow it out in our greenhouses, and collect seeds. We gather a lot of data about those different varieties of hemp, and then we make those different varieties available to the hemp research community for free. So we're trying to conserve the genetic diversity of hemp and then make that available to help science and industry and, you know, a whole cadre of different people who are working with hemp. So we hope that our work here will allow these universities, companies, farmers, and really everyone to benefit from hemp in the next 10, 20, 30 years. Also, while we've been doing this work, we've met so many awesome, brilliant, creative people kind of across the whole spectrum of hemp. And we really want to share them and their knowledge with you. I want to tell you about Hunter Friedland, who is our speaker today. So Hunter is the founder and CEO of Cirona Labs, which he started while he was studying at Cornell University. After conducting a study of the hemp supply chain in New York State, in conjunction with the National Science Foundation, he saw an opportunity to develop a higher standard for cannabinoid ingredients. Since then, he has assembled a world-class team of top scientists and consumer packaged goods experts and successfully secured initial fundraising rounds to ensure the company is set up for long-term growth. Hunter is passionate about the cannabis industry and is dedicated to help building an innovative and equitable industry in New York. So in addition to his role as the CEO of Cirona Labs, he has recently assumed the Processing and Manufacturing Committee Chair role for the New York Cannabis Growers and Processors Association. So without further ado, I bring you Hunter.
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to meet everybody, and thank you for having me. So yeah, today, I'm going to talk a little bit about food science and entrepreneurship in the hemp and cannabis industry, give you a little bit of a background of how I started the company, kind of where we're at today, and some of the pain points that are posed in the industry. I'm going to keep this pretty casual, so feel free to kind of ask questions during the lecture, and I'll try to get to them during the lecture or after. So yeah, without further ado, I'll start by just talking a little bit about functional beverages. I think this is a good way to kind of give everybody a general background of, the history of the industry, where it started, where we think it's going with the emergence of cannabinoids as a, really great functional ingredient to create new specific mood states. So, generally functional beverages is a large market, right? You can see here estimated that it's going to be almost a $400 billion global market by the end of next year, with 56% of consumers having tried products that are trying to, beverage products that are trying to focus on specific health conditions or specific mood states. The way that we look at this market is really starting with the emergence of Red Bull in the energy category. So in the late 90s and the early 2000s, Red Bull, was the first player in this market, started in Thailand, was brought by, I believe, a Dutch company or German company to Europe, and really started in nightclubs where people started using Red Bull, and then a major consumer packaged goods company came to Europe, saw how this product was doing, and started to bring that to the US. And since then, functional beverages and energy drinks make up a huge category in the US, around that time, you saw the emergence of vitamin water, where you have vitamins in beverages, protein beverages. This now with kombucha and stick packs, things like liquid IV. So you're seeing the development of this category starting where consumers are looking for mood states and really functional ingredients and products that have different uses for different times of the day. So, that's kind of where we're at today. As this market starts to emerge, you've seen startups enter the space, as well as major consumer packaged goods companies like Molson Coors and Pepsi and Constellation, jump in. So, over the past few years, as the cannabis industry has gained more steam and CBD has gained more regulatory clarity, you've started to see, an emergence of CBD and other cannabinoids as a functional ingredient to drive mood states. So, where, again, like we talked about before, products like Red Bull and protein drinks are used for specific things. Cannabinoids have the ability to, early days in terms of research, but have the ability to drive these specific mood states. For example, CBD being more of a general wellness ingredient, you're starting to see the emergence of research around minor cannabinoids, cannabinoid like CBN, that has thought and has potential use cases for sleep, or CBG, which is thought to have use cases for energy, in conjunction with these other ingredients. So, as this category starts to evolve, we're going to see, major companies like the Constellations and Pepsis and Cokes of this world start to use these ingredients to drive, again, more mood state specific products. Right now, the landscape of cannabinoid infused beverages is mostly startups. You're starting to see some of the larger consumer packaged goods companies enter the space. But due to what I'll talk about a little bit later, the regulatory environment today, the major multinational CPGs are not really pushing forward in this space just yet. So yeah, right now I'll just kind of give a little bit of a background of how I started the company, where we're at today, and then kind of go through our team and talk more about our specific pain points that we're solving in the marketplace, who our customers are, and what's different about what we do. But again, I'm Hunter Friedland. I started this company in kind of early to mid 2018 while I was a senior at Cornell University. Started getting involved in the industry, kind of by happenstance. A few people in my life, my girlfriend's grandfather and my dad's friend had hemp farms across New York and one in Oregon. So I started learning about the industry. This is all pre-2018 Farm Bill, so pretty early days in the space. But started learning about the space, started to see that there looked like a lot of opportunity and generally a lot of interesting opportunities in the space. So started pushing forward, started ultimately reaching out to a few professors at the university. That's where I got in touch with Larry Smart, as well as a professor called Ali Abazor, who work in the hemp research department and the emulsion science lab at Cornell. So that was really my introduction to what is happening on the science side and where are the main pain points. So from connecting with the university, it was around the same time that applications for the second round of hemp processing licenses opened up in New York State. So we ultimately applied for one of these licenses in, again, late 2018, and started kind of pushing forward. At that point, after we made that application, I applied and got into the National Science Foundation I Corps Program. So that whole program was about solving pain points, kind of working with a unique technology and how do you bring that to market and what are the real pain points that we're solving. At that point, we were really early in the development of the company, and the initial business model was all around extraction. So we started pushing forward and really connecting with anybody in the market that would have a conversation with us across the supply chain, but particularly the licensed hemp farmers in New York. So we talked and had conversations with the vast majority of hemp farmers in New York State. We did 20-minute interviews to understand really what were their pain points, everything at the time from just a general lack of infrastructure, right? Everything from drying to then extraction to then actually sales points. Got a really good overview of who the players were in the market and where we could drive value to the marketplace. So shortly after that, the Farm Bill passed, and that made hemp legal in all 50 states, at least at the beginning of that transition. So that was a really exciting moment. And shortly after the passing of the Farm Bill, we received one of the few licenses to process hemp under the Research Partnership Agreement in New York State. I graduated a few months after that, and just myself started kind of going to conferences and, again, keeping pushing forward to see where do we fit in this marketplace. And initially, after doing the NSF I Corps program, we determined that extraction was a major pain point in the market. Right, there was very limited infrastructure in New York State, and kind of acting as this clearinghouse, taking hemp farmers' product and turning them into a usable ingredient for a variety of consumer packaged goods products seemed like the best place to start to build a business. But after a few months of going to conferences, really getting a bigger understanding of what does the market look like beyond just New York State, but really across the US, we saw that extraction was starting to become more of a commodity business. There was no real IP that we could develop around that side of the supply chain. And we started to take the pivot towards formulation, which I'll talk a lot about in this lecture today. But that was around the time that I met two of my three co-founders, who I'll talk a little bit more about after this. But Nick, who is a PhD in food science from Cornell, who formerly worked at Cannabis Growth, one of the largest cannabis companies in the world, joined the company, and we started kind of pushing them towards formulation, where there's a general big problem with cannabis. Cannabis in general, by nature, is an oil, and oil and water don't mix. So how do you create products like beverages or confectionery products that during the manufacturing process have mainly a water base? So we kind of pushed towards that and started developing solutions around really spray dried powders and emulsion technology, which the basic concept is taking a big oil particle and making it a really small, stable nano emulsion. And I'll talk more specifically about these pain points as we move forward, but started pushing towards that problem in the market. Ended up raising our first round of funding, that was the end of 2020, where we raised our first round and got up and running out of our lab in Geneva, New York. We are located in the Cornell Tech Farm, which is Cornell's kind of incubation space for food and ag startups. And that's where our whole business is based today. So with that said, I will start to move to the next slide and just talk a little bit more about our team, and then we'll talk more about the business. And I gave you guys generally my background. I went to Cornell. I studied hospitality, so it didn't come from the agriculture or the hardcore sciences, but studied the hospitality business in school, graduated, and started this business. But Nick is also a Cornellian. He has a food science PhD from Cornell. He graduated in 2009, I believe. And after his PhD, he went to work for a company called Constellation Brands. Constellation Brands is one of the largest beverage alcohol companies in the US that owns and distributes brands like Corona beer or Robin Bobby wines. He worked there for about 8 years in research and development. And after his tenure for there, Constellation made a large investment company called Cannabis Growth, which at the time was the largest Canadian cannabis company in the world. And Nick was tapped as the first person to run their R&D department. So he led the team that commercialized the first CBD and THC beverages in the Canadian market, and as well as launching their general 2.0 cannabis products. So products like edibles and vapes and infused pre-rolls and topicals. So that was kind of Nick's background. Did that for 3 years and then joined us as a co-founder in the business. Alan joined around the same time. Alan's our chief operating officer. He comes from a food, beverage, and alcohol background, working mainly for a company called Ledestri Food and Drink, which is based out of Rochester, New York. Ledestri is one of the largest contract manufacturers in the US, meaning they manufacture products for a variety of different brands and companies. So a company like Pepsi could go to a company like Ledestri and have them manufacture a variety of their SKUs. And I think that's kind of a misconception that people see in the CPG industry, that all these companies are manufacturing their own products, but they're actually businesses called co-packers that manufacture for a variety of different companies and create a much more efficient supply chain that way. So Alan worked at Ledestri for around 25 years, ended up running a $350 million division there, where he ran the whole co-packing division, worked with companies like Barilla, Heinz, Pepsi, Monster, and et cetera throughout his career. Left, worked in private equity for a few years, and then joined us as the chief operating officer. And he's a co-founder, and the four of us, including LJ, are the four co-founders. And LJ is the Candyman, we like to call him. His family was the Ferrera Pan Candy Company, which was one of the largest candy companies in the US before they exited in 2017. The company owned and operated brands like Lemonheads, Fireball, Choli Gummy Bear, Black Forest Gummy Bear. At the time of exit, they represented 70% of the gummies on the shelf in the convenience store, besides Haribo. So, really one of the global players in the candy industry. So after 30 years there, they exited to Ferrero, the makers of Nutella. And then LG started making investments in the cannabis industry. He went out to California and ran an edibles company out there before joining us as the chief innovation officer. So those are the four co-founders in the company. I'll quickly go through the rest. At this point, we're a small and kind of close-knit team, but really, which I'll emphasize, really hiring the best is critical when building a business, particularly in this industry. So quickly, Cam is the chief commercial officer. He also comes from Canopy Growth. He worked at in a variety of marketing and sales roles at major CPG companies like Molson Coors and Kellogg's, before ending up at Canopy, where he ran their beverage department on the marketing and sales side. Saul is a PhD chemist. He worked in the pharmaceutical industry after his PhD, and then went to work for Canopy Growth under Nick, working there for 4 years before joining us. Xavier, or X, is our director of business development. He comes from LA and worked in Silicon Valley for 5 or 6 years in business development roles and sales roles across a variety of venture-backed startups from the incubator called Y Combinator. And after doing those sales and business development roles, he ended up launching his own CBD beverage in late 2018. That company ultimately failed, but learned tremendous amount by being one of the first CBD beverages to launch into the market. And X runs BizDev as well as all of our social impact initiatives. So that is the team. Let's see. So yeah, now I'll just talk a little bit more specifically about what we do as a part of the supply chain at Cirona Labs, and I'll talk briefly about our kind of parent company, Kings Road Holdings, where we're expanding into the more traditional cannabis market in New York. But starting from kind of get-go, it all starts with the seed, right? You have your genetics that drive what product we produce, and whether the genetics are going to determine you're producing a hemp plant or a cannabis plant. We have a variety of different genetics that perform better in certain environments. Again, this is something that George and Larry's team can tell you about a lot more intelligently than I can, but that's where it all starts. So after the seeds are grown into a plant, the plants are harvested, and then in our case, collected for biomass, where they're dried, harvested, and then sent to the processor, right? So we're kind of sit in that processing side of the supply chain, right? Initially, and today, we sit right after the actual extractor, but after the biomass is harvested, the biomass goes to an extractor where it's extracted for its active oil. Right, so the cannabis is used, a variety of different extraction methods, but the most popular, at least in the hemp side, being ethanol. So the solvent is used to extract the active product, in this case CBD or THC or CBN, from the plant material into a more concentrated oil format. Then it goes through a distillation process to create a distillate. At that point, you can either use that as your core input, or isolate, which is an isolated cannabinoid. So kind of taking your full spectrum product, meaning the full essence of the plant, including its terpenes and the variety of cannabinoids that are present in that plant material, or isolating one specific cannabinoid, which in most cases right now for the hemp industry is CBD. So that's kind of where we come in as a formulator in this space. So we take the inputs, being isolate or distillate, and convert that into a water dispersible product where we have IP, which is kind of our unique formulation. In conjunction with the active product, we emulsify it and to create, again, these very small nanoparticles that are then used to create stable and efficacious ingredients for water-based products in the industry. We have two kind of inputs. It's either a spray dried powder or a liquid emulsion. So once you have your input ingredient, whether that being a distillate or a water-soluble product that we produce, you get into the commercialization and manufacturing process, right? When you're taking these ingredients and manufacturing a variety of products, like beverages or gummies or vapes. And that is, kind of what that co-packing business is. Again, today we're only doing the formulation work, but as we move into the New York adult use cannabis market, we are opening up a cannabis manufacturing facility where we will actually manufacture the end products for these other brands, similar to the business I mentioned before that Alan operated called Medestry. So it's, again, scaled manufacturing, operating as an efficient operator to bring costs down for a variety of the brands in the market by producing in one singular facility. So after the manufacturing process, then you move to retail, where products are then sold, in the case of CBD, at a variety of different places, from online to big box retailers or convenience stores, or on the cannabis side of the market, strictly being sold at dispensaries, at licensed dispensaries. So let's move on to the next slide. So I will kind of talk generally about the challenges on our side of the marketplace, right? When you're taking, again, a distillate and turning it into a water-soluble product. At the end of the day, we're servicing food and beverage products, and taste is king, right? If a product doesn't taste good, consumers really do not want to use that product. And by nature, cannabis is a really bitter product and really bitter ingredient. So that's a challenge that we've pushed to solve, and creating an ingredient that can be efficacious, that we'll talk about in a second, but it has limited to no taste at higher dosages in the product. So taste is a very, very important aspect of this industry. Inconsistent efficacy, right? I think I've heard, I've said that word efficacy for a while, but what does that mean in conjunction to this market? It really comes down to kind of two terms: onset time and bioavailability, right? How fast does this ingredient get into the bloodstream once it's consumed, and at what level does it get into the bloodstream? Because you can have, for example, let's just say 1,000 milligrams of CBD in an end product, but if that CBD doesn't actually get into the blood, it's not having an effect for that person, for that use case. So efficacy is critical, and is, again, something that we've solved and proven by hard data, which I'll talk about later, as we've shown through our pharmacokinetic studies. Compatibility is the next piece, right? As I mentioned, cannabis by nature is an oil, and oil and water don't mix. So how do you create a product that is stable? Meaning, once we've created our emulsion, how does that emulsion then stay into the beverage or water-based product for a long period of time without separating? The easiest way to kind of visualize this is a salad dressing, right? You see the oil and the base of the salad dressing, separated, but as you mix it and shake it, it becomes homogeneous. But pretty quickly, leaving it on the shelf, maybe after 10, 20, 30 minutes, an hour, it goes back to where it was before, where the oil and base are separated. So that's a huge problem, in this space. If you're creating an ingredient that is supposed to, be an emulsion, be able to be mixed into water, and then is being put into and packaged in a can, for example, you can't have that product separate over time, because then you're going to have an oil slick at the top of the beverage, and it's not a nice experience for the consumer, and it's a less efficacious product. So stability and compatibility are key. To kind of expand upon that, how we build our emulsions is by custom, based on the product type. So, for example, a coffee versus a tea versus seltzer water all have different chemistries by nature of the product. So one emulsion isn't necessarily going to work for all of those different product types. So that's, again, how we produce our emulsions here at Cirona. It's a big differentiator, but I will talk more to that as the presentation goes on. The last two pieces are poor appearance. Having a very cloudy emulsion is something that is not as appealing for the consumer. So how do you create a product that is, completely translucent, but also has a minimal taste for the end consumer? And then lastly is scientific validation. Particularly a lot of our competitors in the space kind of talk through, how fast onset time, how great their efficacy is, but there really is no evidence to back that up. So that's something that we take really seriously here at the company, and truly backing our ingredients by science. And I will be showing you, the results from our first pharmacokinetic study where we dosed rats and tested the bloodstream over certain intervals to prove how quickly the onset time was and what the bioavailability of our ingredient is compared to basic products on the market. So, just kind of giving a little bit larger view of, what our solutions are. I mentioned before, we have two products, a liquid emulsion and a spray dried powder. The main features are water solubility, meaning it can mix into water and stay stable. They're fast acting. They have high bioavailability. And something unique about our ingredients from a label point of view is that we have no preservatives in our products. We kind of hit multiple applications with our ingredients, from beverages to powdered mixes to topical products, edibles, tinctures, and pet products. So a wide range of product types that we can power as an ingredient supplier in this space. So, talking more specifically about our science and how the process works, as I mentioned before, we start with our active input, call it a distillate or an isolate. Once that hemp or cannabis extract is acquired in the facility, we mix that with our proprietary blend of emulsifiers and surfactants. That is kind of what our IP covers. At this point, we're now patent pending. And after taking that mixture of your emulsifiers and surfactants, in addition to the active hemp material, you then use a variety of different processes, but the basic concept is high pressure, where you're taking a machine as a diamond tip and really high pressure to break these particles into really, really small particles while they're mixed with the unique base to then create your nanoemulsion, right? So taking something from a really big particle into millions of really small nanoparticles that can now be easily mixed into a water-based product, as well as having a faster onset time, as I've mentioned before. So talking a little bit more about our pharmacokinetic study, again, we really strive to have real evidence behind our ingredients here, both from a stability point of view, but also from a bioavailability and onset time view. So what we did last year is we worked with a CRO, which is a clinical research organization. We work with them to dose rats with our ingredient and test their blood at certain intervals. So if you can see on my screen, the dark blue line is our emulsion. The light blue line is what we call a basic emulsion, something like our competitors use. And the green line is your basic oil tincture in the market, right? Taking a distillate and mixing that with something like an olive oil or MCT oil. So we dosed rats with equal amounts of product with these three bases and tested their blood. And we were shown to have a much faster onset of 5 to 10 minutes already showing up in the bloodstream, and around 30 minutes to what's called the Cmax, which is the highest concentration marked in the bloodstream for that ingredient that you're testing for. So as you can see here, our ingredient has a much faster onset time and gets into the bloodstream at a much higher rate than the oil tincture, almost 5x the highest concentration in the oil tincture our ingredient achieves. And then compared to kind of a basic emulsion in the market, we have almost twice as fast of an onset time as the competition. So again, we're continuing to push this forward. Right now, we're in works to do a study in conjunction with some labs at Cornell, and kind of moving from a rat model to a dog model, and then hopefully soon in the future into human models to continue to learn more and develop more data around our products. Let's see. So yeah, maybe I'll kind of take a step back and talk a little bit about the regulatory environment. Generally that is one of the things holding this industry back the most is the complicated structure of how do you actually commercialize products in this space. But to kind of take a step back, it really all started with the 2018 Farm Bill that legalized hemp in all 50 states. That really got this industry started. You saw a huge hype cycle right after that. Farm Bill passed, with prices for raw ingredients increasing almost tenfold and then dropping more than that over the course of a year and a half. It was quite, exciting and interesting time in the market. But with the emergence of that farm bill, we had a truly legal market where now you could produce hemp products in one state, and as long as they're under 0.3% THC, Delta 9 THC, they could be then distributed and used in different products. So, that talks to the infused products piece of things. But, where we kind of moved from the FDA, from the 2018 Farm Bill, is to the FDA. And the fact that there's a lack of regulation in the space, right? This is the major reason why you see companies like Coke and Pepsi and Monster and Red Bull not launching CBD infused products, is the fact that the FDA has no regulatory structure around the industry. Right now, the only stance that the FDA has taken is kind of giving warning letters to companies that kind of abuse the rules, right? Making structure function claims, on CBD or other cannabinoids, for example, saying that CBD cures COVID or cures or has specific properties, right? Those are things that you're not allowed to do, and you need real evidence and to go through FDA trials to back that by real structure function claims. But the lack of FDA regulation in general for food and beverage and dietary supplement products, and kind of not telling the industry operators how to produce products, how to distribute products, how to label products, poses a major issue for the industry as it starts to expand and bigger players start to jump into the industry. So, something that has developed from the lack of FDA regulation is really state cannabis legislation. So, for example, both in California and New York over the past year has regulated CBD in their specific market. So, New York has their hemp regulations that were released, I believe, 6 to 8 months ago, that give clear pathway in terms of how to operate as a licensed entity and as a cannabis infused CBD infused product on the shelf. They give clear limits on how many milligrams you can use per unit. They give a clear process of what kind of regulatory licenses as well as compliance measures to have your manufacturing operation. For example, something very common in the consumer packaged goods and co-packing industry is a compliance measure called current good manufacturing practices. It's a process of tracking your ingredients, the supply chain, tracking your products, tracking how you produce products in your facility. So it's again compliance to make sure that your ingredients, have a certain quality and again are safe. So that is something that New York has created clear regulatory structure around, and has created clear regulatory structure around it, has allowed the market to start to develop and grow in New York State. So it's exciting, and you've seen similar regulations happen in California with the passing of AB 45, Assembly Bill 45. If anybody would like to search that up after the lecture. State by state labeling kind of goes hand in hand with state by state cannabis legislation. That's a big difficulty in this space, where it's great that you're starting to see a real regulatory structure that allows operators to create a clear path to commercializing products. With that different regulatory structure in each state, it creates huge confusion for products, right? So maybe you have a CBD tincture in one state, you may have a completely different labeling requirements in another state. So that really creates a lot of inefficiencies in the supply chain and causes major problems, at the end of the day. Maybe the last thing I'll kind of end this off with is Delta 8 and kind of your hemp-derived psychoactive cannabinoids. So Delta 8 and other similar cannabinoids like THCO or HHC are isomers of the cannabis plant. So some of these cannabinoids show up in the plant which at a very, very small, minute percentage. But there's been chemical reactions and ways that you can take products like a CBD isolate and turn that into a product like Delta 8. So what Delta 8 is, it's really kind of a loophole in the language in the Farm Bill. Whereas I mentioned before, what constitutes hemp versus cannabis is kind of this base number of 0.3% Delta 9 THC active in the plant material. So Delta 8 is a different form of, it's a different cannabinoid than Delta 9, but has similar psychoactive effects, but due to the strict language in the Farm Bill that specifically states Delta 9 THC percentages as the indication of cannabis, there's now a loophole for to get psychoactive Delta 8 products that are derived from hemp onto the shelf. So this has been a market that's been exploding over the past 2 years, around 2 years. But now it's kind of been pushed back with backlash from different states. For example, New York has explicitly stated in their hemp regulations that Delta 8 is not allowed to be produced and sold in New York. So I think that's a good overview of the regulatory environment. Right now, before I kind of open up for a larger Q&A, I just want to talk generally about entrepreneurship. I think looking at large and emerging markets is a great way to kind of start the journey and seeing something that you really have a passion for. People are number two. People are the most important asset of any company. Bringing in the best talent for a variety of different factors is critical to building a long-lasting business. And lastly, solving a real problem. Like I mentioned, as I was starting this business, really learning, what the problems were of the farmers and the processors and the brands allowed us to kind of find our niche and build this business. So yeah, with that said, I'll kind of stop here and open it up for questions. I really appreciate everybody's time, and I'm excited to continue this conversation.
Yeah, thank you for that fantastic talk, Hunter. We have some questions in the Q&A. If you have a question and you haven't put it in the Q&A, please do that, and I will get through as many as I can. Remember, the Q&A is slightly different than the chat. You can access the Q&A from the little widget at the bottom of your screen. Okay, first question we have for CBD and food products, is it extracted from plants or can it come from cell cultures? So
at least all the distillate or isolate that we've purchased, so I'll kind of take a step back. All the general commercially available product on the market today comes from plant material, right? You grow your hemp plant, process, you take that to biomass, and then extract that, and that's your kind of core input material. That being said, in terms of, George, I believe you mentioned cell cultures, right, before. So I believe that has some relation to different genetics that can be produced and cuts of different plants that drive certain genetics, which kind of drives your biomass inputs. That being said, I will kind of talk about another up and coming side of the market, which is biosynthesis, where you're taking yeast to produce cannabinoids, similar to the way that beer is produced today, right? When you look at kind of particularly your cheaper beers on the shelf, like a Coors or a Bud Light, that is not naturally derived from hops. Those are yeast, basically yeast cultured, alcohol that's developed to produce that beer. So now you're seeing a lot of technology that is using this biosynthesis process to basically manufacture, cannabinoids synthetically. It's not really a true synthetic process. It does, come, from the plant. But that is a really up and coming sector of the industry that's really exciting.
Okay, another question. So the industry challenges that you kind of covered, would you say those are based on kind of the traditional cannabis target market, or has the target market moved to incorporate more general consumers?
So yeah, my view, and I'll just talk cannabis industry in general, it's an ever evolving landscape. Right, as we've seen, markets come online, and I'll kind of talk THC, to start, because I think it's easier to kind of talk numbers. There's a little bit clearer data around that. You see that in the early stages of the markets that, smokable flower and pre-rolls are the vast majority, right? 55+%, 60% of the market. But over time, as a legal market comes online, you start to see less and less smokable product, or at least flower product, controlling the market, and more edible products gaining steam, vape products gaining steam, topical products gaining steam to take up more market share, where now you're really kind of seeing almost a 50-50 split in these markets. So, I think what we're really developing for is kind of that sector of the marketplace, right? As new consumers jump into the space, there is, a lack of comfortability around smoking a product, right? Someone who hasn't necessarily consumed cannabis in the past or CBD doesn't want to necessarily start, smoking and adding that to their lifestyle. But adding, a more generalized product that they're used to, like a beverage or, a gel cap or a confectionery vitamin type product, is something that, is really generally something they do on a daily basis. And there's not, really a big push to their normal lifestyle. So we see as the industry starts moving forward and cannabis becomes, more accepted, that these infused products, which now represent around half the market, will continue to become the leader in market share for the industry. So yeah, it's a good baseline of what we do, and yeah, those pain points we're referring to are really revolving around infused products, and particularly water-based infused products. For example, a vape is an oil-based, and you wouldn't use a water-soluble product in that. But really, your ingestible or topical water-based products is, what we're solving this problem for.
Great. Actually, I have a question. So you've focused a lot on kind of like CBD and emulsions, but obviously hemp has like tons of different uses, specifically like hemp seeds. So I'm wondering if your company has explored anything with like hemp seed oil or hemp protein, or any people exploring that kind of space?
So, we've definitely looked at the space to some degree. Right now, I think our expertise, particularly on the science side, is really relates to food science and chemistry. So more, on the kind of active ingredient side of the market. So, there's still so much science to be done in that area that we want to, continue pushing and tackling problems around that side of the market. But generally, from an interest point of view, I'm super excited about all the different attributes of hemp, from hemp seeds to the fiber, and how that can affect everything from construction to clothing to better protein sources. So us as a company today aren't really pushing towards that side of the market, but it's something I definitely have a lot of interest as well as excitement around.
Great. Okay, another question from the audience. This is kind of a logistics question. Given that full spectrum distillate is likely over 0.3% THC, how do you deal with that on the legal side?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the state by state regs, all have different rules. But for example, in New York, don't quote me on it, but I believe it is up to 3% in what's called work in progress hemp material. So depending on the state, you'll have different regulations that qualify what you can use as a licensed manufacturer, as it's not an end consumer product, right? So when you're looking at a distillate, it has to be derived from a hemp plant that has less than 0.3% in the product, that then is extracted, and maybe taking it from 10% CBD to 85% CBD. So if you're at 0.1% THC in the plant material, now you're at just under a percentage point. But based on New York regs, you're still that's perfectly compliant, as long as the end product, whether that be the tincture or a beverage, etc., has less than 0.3% Delta 9 THC by weight. So generally, that is a problem, in the market, particularly with other states not regulating that, and people crossing state lines, and certain states that still have kind of antiquated laws around this space. I think you've started to see a lot of slowdown in convictions around hemp products being crossing state lines. But in the kind of 2018, 2019 timeframe, you saw a lot of there's some real issues with that, as companies were crossing state lines with those products. But in New York, you have clear regulations around what's allowed to be used in the licensed supply chain. So, yeah.
We have another question. Is your company doing anything with terpenes, or do you see that as another space in addition to cannabinoids?
Yeah, so we're super, super excited about terpenes, and maybe I'll start by saying that terpenes by nature are an oil, right? So our technology is applicable to terpenes, and something that personally I'm super excited about and feel that terpenes are really going to be the next driver of kind of mood states in addition to cannabinoids, right? How do you drive specific functions, with the addition of unique terpenes in conjunction with those cannabinoids? So I think there's a lot of research to be done in terms of what terpenes do they do anything or not? And people a lot smarter than me are the ones kind of developing that research and really seeing what does what. But yeah, we're starting to see, at least from the commercial side, a lot more interest of brands wanting to use terpenes and water soluble terpenes in their products. So it's definitely something we're pursuing and now doing R&D on, and now we're actually producing water soluble terpenes as a product line. So that's funny. That's something we've been just really started to commercialize over the past few weeks. So it's a really exciting part of the market.
Very cool. A couple of questions on your study to compare your kind of emulsion to the standard industry emulsion and the oil. So when you indicate that you achieved better results, how would you define this quantitatively? And have other studies kind of been done like this to determine like what a rapid onset means or what extended length of effect means?
Yeah, so in terms of quantitative analysis, there's a couple key points, right? I think I mentioned Cmax, right? So Cmax is the highest concentration in the bloodstream that's recorded in one of these PK studies. So from a basic level, we compared the Cmax of our emulsion to the Cmax of the basic emulsion to the Cmax of the oil tincture, and showed that ours was 30 minutes, the basic emulsion was 70 minutes, and the oil tincture was 180 plus minutes. Didn't really ever reach a full peak over the course of, I believe, 4 hours or so. So that's like generally quantitatively how we're testing that, in addition to just seeing when it shows up in the bloodstream. As you saw in that graph, those are actual results from the rat study that have said, okay, at this interval in time, there was this many milligrams in the bloodstream versus these other product types. So again, this is just the first of many studies that we plan to do. And yeah, again, our next study is going to be around a dog model, hopefully one day around a human model. And comparing to some of the competition in the space, I think exactly what you mentioned, where there's a lack of real evidence, is why we decided to invest in these quite expensive studies. But we feel that it's really important to actually have real data behind what we're doing, as opposed to just making claims of we have fast onset time, or we have an onset time of 5 minutes or 2 minutes, or a high bioavailability, which we see a lot of the competition in the space do. But those claims are kind of backed by nothing, which again, we feel is a big problem. And as you see more sophisticated consumer packaged goods companies come into the space, they're really going to be looking for this hard evidence from an efficacy point of view, as well as from a stability point of view. So, that's really what we're building up to right now, is trying to build as big of a book of evidence as possible, getting ready for future FDA regulation.
Great. Another question on that study. So how would you expect the levels in the model system to correlate to humans? Do you know what levels of CBD are required to achieve physiologically significant effects?
So, again, I'm not the full-on scientist. I've learned slowly by doing here, with great people around us. I believe the rat model is a great indicator of what it can look like in a mammalian model. Again, what we're doing to push forward is then moving up the next chain to a dog, and then one day doing a human. But then again, the cost associated with doing these more complicated models are significantly increasing, even going from the rat to the dog and dog to humans. So it's definitely something that we plan to do, as the company develops. In terms of like what is an efficacious dose, I think that's a big, not necessarily controversy, but a big talking point in the industry, right? For example, in New York, it's 25 milligrams max per unit in a food and beverage product. So the question is does that actually, is that a real efficacious dose? What is an efficacious dose? What is placebo effect versus not? I can talk from, the one approved pharmaceutical drug in the market called Epidiolex. That's a drug used for children with epilepsy. Those doses range from 600 to 2,000 plus milligrams. So that's what we're seeing as like a true pharmaceutical dose. That being said, for more of your wellness doses, what we see in the market is somewhere in the range of 25 to 100 milligrams with, regulations kind of limiting your food and beverage products at a 25 milligram per unit base. So again, I think that's where there's opportunities in the space to just kind of push science, learn more, invest more money in research as we continue to develop out. Again, that's another issue just with the FDA, right? The lack of regulation in the space is really limiting research around, what do these cannabinoids actually do, and what do we need to, and how much do we need to take, et cetera. So I hope that's just an answer for you.
Another question, people are very interested in the study that you did. Are you looking to kind of explore or conduct studies on like pregnant mice or pregnant rats? And they point out that it might be important for regulations because this is a specifically vulnerable or population.
To be honest, I never even thought about that. I think I'll bring that up with Nick as we move into our next study. I know our next one is definitely going to be in a dog model. But as we move forward, just trying to, again, build up a book of evidence and kind of anticipating what the FDA regulations look like. And I think I saw something in the Q&A chat box about novel foods. One of the big things that we want to do is a toxicity study, right? That's a really, really expensive study, upwards of potentially a $500,000 plus study. So, and that's what we want to get to. But right now, with lack of rules and knowing what we need to even test for, at least in the US, it's hard to make those investments. So, again, right now we're kind of taking it one step at a time and trying to build up as much evidence as possible, while keeping costs under control.
Awesome. Another question, have you been able to export your cannabinoid ingredients to Europe? And do you have novel foods authorization?
So we don't have novel foods authorization just yet, something that we've been looking into. That being said, we will be announcing in the next couple weeks our entrance into the Southeast Asian market. We're going to be entering the Thai market through a licensing deal. Thailand has really clear regulations around the use of CBD in products. Now it's a fully legal market there. So we will be working with an operator on the ground in Thailand to bring our technology to that market. So that'll be our first international expansion. Will be into Thailand and the Southeast Asian market. So we're really excited about that. And this is the first time I've talked about it publicly. So exciting to talk about that.
Very cool. I think we'll just do one more question here and wrap it up. I know you probably put you through the ringer these last 15 minutes.
I love it.
So we got one more. Have you done stability testing on your products, and what kind of shelf life range have you seen?
Yeah, so our products have stayed on the shelf for well over a year and have shown really great stability, less than a few percentage points of degradation. Again, what we do is a couple of different paths, right? We've left our products on the shelf that have true stability of, an actual time, in a product, as well as just as an ingredient on the shelf. There's nothing better than that stability test. There's also rapid stability where you can use heated chambers to anticipate, in a quicker time. So maybe a month can look like a year from a stability point of view in these different stability chambers. And then the last way that we go about stability tested is using a unique rapid stability equipment where we, basically test, infused product and see, basically spin it really fast and light particles through it to kind of anticipate how stable is something really quickly. So as opposed to even taking a month or 2 months sitting on the shelf in a heated chamber, we can tell in a matter of hours, generally how physically stable our emulsion is with a certain product type, and that goes to kind of our customization. But that's the 3 ways we go about stability testing, and we stability, do a rapid stability test on any product before it's commercialized to get that baseline at a minimum.
So I want to thank you once again, Hunter, for that wonderful talk. I sure learned a lot, and it was fascinating to see your perspective and experience. I believe that many of our attendees feel the same way. So, best of luck to you, and thanks again for all of your time. And it was a real pleasure to hear your talk.
Thank you so much, everybody. Again, my contact information is here. Please feel free to reach out, and I'm looking forward to continuing this. And again, thank you, everybody.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.